Well, thank you very much. Thank you first and foremost for everybody's patience there with a little bit of a hiccup in the tech. Following on from last week's presentation by Ian Dinwiddie on the topic of shared parental leave, where Ian shared his insights and his experience of that particular policy, which we understand the uptake has been very poor since its inception in 2015. We now have Jeremy Davies from the Fatherhood Institute, who will be talking about statutory paternity leave. Now, Jeremy, before I hand over, on behalf of everyone here, I'm sure, and for many, well, about 14,000 other people who signed the petition that you put together, we want to thank you for all of your efforts for driving this forward and looking to extend paternity leave. Obviously, there was a knockback from the government on that, but that doesn't stop the process, and it doesn't mean that the tremendous efforts, shouldn't be acknowledged. So with that as a precis, I want to hand over to Jeremy Davies.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thank you for your kind words. That's much appreciated. So yes, I'm here today to talk about paternity leave, or rather the UK's statutory paternity offer, and the work that we are doing and hoping to continue to build the case for a better system. So next slide, please. So I can't see the slides, incidentally, so I'm trusting that the slides are progressing as I go. I hope that works. So this is an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to talk a little bit about the current system and what we think is wrong with it, why that matters, what needs to change, and then I'm going to talk a bit about the campaign, what's happened so far, and hopefully where we're going with it. Next slide, please. So you should be seeing a table now of the current system. So I want to just quickly look at this. This summarizes mothers and fathers' individual right to leave and pay under the current system. Most of you, I'm sure, will be already aware of this, but employed UK mothers are entitled to 52 weeks maternity leave, 6 of them paid at 90% of average earnings, and 33 at the statutory rate, plus 13 weeks unpaid. And there's also a maternity allowance of up to the statutory rate for 39 weeks for those who are not employed. If you look at the father column, employed fathers get 2 weeks paternity paid at the statutory rate. Those who are not classified as employees, including those who are self-employed or who work in the gig economy, for example, that's roughly 20% of fathers in total, have 0 entitlement. And what you're looking at is the most gender imbalanced system in the developed world. It amplifies gendered inequalities in earning and caregiving at the very point in parents' lives where their respective roles are shaped, i.e. the baby's first year. Next slide, please.
We're on what's wrong paternity leave.
That's correct. Very good. So the 2 weeks of paternity leave, which is paid at less than half the minimum wage, leaves families struggling financially. And that's at a point where some of them are really vulnerable. So we know that more than half of families say they struggle financially when fathers take paternity leave. And we know that 1/3 of fathers, roughly, with a household income of less than 25,000, aren't taking it. We worked out that an average earning full-time working father earns about £1,000 less if he takes 2 weeks paternity leave paid at the statutory rate than he would if he carried on working. That's a lot of money. And we know that a fifth of fathers aren't even eligible because they're self-employed or they don't fit the eligibility criteria as an employee. And we know that about 70% of self-employed fathers take no time off when their babies arrive. So all of this adds up to basically a huge missed opportunity to ensure that men build vital bonds with their babies and are able to properly look after their partners in the early postnatal period. Next slide, please. So the government keeps telling us that everything's fine because fathers who want to take more than 2 weeks can use shared parental leave. But that system doesn't work. And although I wasn't able to come to Ian's presentation recently, I'm sure he will have provided lots of evidence of that. So most families aren't eligible to shared parental leave in the first place. And only a tiny percentage of those who are using it. Why is that? Well, mostly because they can't afford to. Fathers tend to earn more, so the natural thing is for the lower earner to stay off work. Shared parental leave really only works for better off families, and especially those whose employers enhance the pay. And that leaves almost all of Britain's fathers with no access to leave beyond the 2 weeks of paternity leave, which, as we've seen, is itself only available to 80% of fathers. Again, what we're looking at is a huge missed opportunity to raise our expectations and provide support to men as hands-on caregivers. Next slide, please. So, how does the UK system compare internationally? Well, not well, I'm afraid. The average amount of paid leave for fathers in the EU is 8.5 weeks, and in the OECD, it's 10.4 weeks. In the UK, it's 2. The countries that do best on gender equality give dads their own parental leave and pay it well. And guess what? The fathers take it. These countries have lower gender pay gaps and smaller gaps in men's and women's participation in the workforce. And for anyone thinking, well, it's okay because in the UK, there are lots of employers that top up the statutory paternity offer. Yes, some do. And Elliot Ray has produced a useful list of 75 employers with more generous offers. But we estimate that only about a quarter of employers offer more than the statutory rate. And in most cases, their offers will still be a long way from these international comparators. Next slide, please. Okay, what we're looking at here is some figures that I found buried quite deep in the government's evaluation of shared parental leave, which was published last summer. I got my calculator out and worked out what percentage of our total spending on parenting leave pay goes on paternity. And if you look at row 2, you'll see that it's less than 2%, and less than 1% goes on shared parental pay. So for me, it's as clear as day how low a priority paternal caregiving is in the UK. Next slide, please. Bullet points on this. So we think that time for change is now, and here's why. So number one, we're missing opportunities to support improved father-child attachment and child development, which have been shown to be impacted by fathers taking leave. Essential building block for fathers' involvement in childcare, which in itself has huge impacts on children's outcomes that last a lifetime. Recent studies for caring change more in fathers who take leave than in those who don't. The second point here is fathers taking leave also impacts positively on parental relationships. That helps keep families together, and it also feeds into more positive outcomes for children. Substantial leave, especially if it's taken later in the baby's first year, gets fathers into the rhythm of acting as a confident, fully involved, hands-on caregiver. That's great for the dads because they get to experience the joy of forming really close, mutually reinforcing relationships with their children that will last a lifetime. And it also brings benefits to children. Last year, the Peace Study, our collaboration with Leeds University, found that fathers' early involvement in childcare has a direct impact on children's school outcomes at age 5, for example. Fathers taking leave is also great for mothers who can share the joys and burdens of being responsible for unpaid childcare. It means they're much better equipped to move back into the workplace earlier, safe in the knowledge that dad's got things covered. We've known for many years that women experience a motherhood penalty, a loss in lifetime earnings characterized by underemployment and slower career progression when they return to work. Our traditionalist model of parenting leave is a big part of this. It institutionalizes the idea that women alone will take the hit and take responsibility for childcare provision throughout the baby's first year. 6 weeks for dads would start to reduce the motherhood penalty, and in doing so, Pregnant Then Screwed have estimated that it could help bring about a £23 billion increase in economic output for a cost of around 1 billion to 1.6 billion. It would also reduce parents' reliance on paid-for childcare in the first year, and combined with a stronger emphasis on flexible working by fathers as well as mothers, that could help the government solve the conundrum of families not being able to access or afford high-quality education and childcare for their young children. Okay, next slide, please. So, what needs to change? This slide summarizes what we're calling for in our 6 Weeks for Dads campaign. So, 2 weeks paternity leave paid at 90%, 4 weeks non-transferable use it or lose it parental leave in the baby's first year, also paid at 90%. Both of these should be a day one right for all employed fathers and second parents, with a cap for higher earners. And there should be a paternity allowance for other fathers and second parents, similar to the maternity allowance currently available to mothers. Now, we're not saying this is the perfect system, but we think it's a stepping stone towards a more equitable system. Next slide, please. So, our campaign so far. We started this work last summer when we organised an open letter to Kemi Badenoch, the Business and Trade Secretary, objecting to the government's decision not to reform paternity and parental leave. This was our response to the government's publication of its response to its own consultation about reform, launched 5 years earlier, and its evaluation of the shared parental leave scheme. I've put here the names of the broad-based coalition of organisations and individuals who joined us in this action. And you can see the breadth and quality of the people who signed. You can read our letter and the response we received from the government using the QR codes here. And here, Chris, we were talking before about who it was who responded to our letter. So Kevin Hollinrake is Minister for Enterprise Markets and Small Business. That's his job title. So, as you might expect, the government didn't shift its position in its response, but the level of support we received for this open letter was brilliant. And it's really helped build a sense that change is needed in this area. Next slide, please. So, buoyed by the enthusiasm we received for the open letter, we went on to launch our parliamentary petition calling for the 6 weeks for dads proposal that I've already described. Excuse me. We needed to get 10,000 signatures to force a government response to this. And the good news is that we managed to smash that target on the 11th of January, which was the 6-month deadline. Again, we couldn't have done this on our own. We had lots of help from many of the people on the previous slide and others. And again, I take this as a clear sign that there is an appetite out there for a more father-inclusive statutory offer for families. Interestingly, as you'll see here, the 10 constituencies with the highest number of signatures were all Labour. And we've written to all of these MPs, as well as to others holding key positions in the opposition, to let them know about our campaign. And we've already started to receive some responses. Next slide, please. I'm nearly done. So, yeah, the government's response to the petition, this came out a couple of weeks ago. It's fundamentally similar to the one we received to the open letter, pointing helpfully again to the sunny uplands of the shared parental leave system, the very system that the government's own evaluation found is used by 1% of eligible mothers and 5% of eligible fathers. And incidentally, Maternity Action reckons it's more like 2% of eligible fathers. The section highlighted in bold here in their response is interesting, I think. So they say statutory parental payments are designed to offer a degree of earnings replacement to enable parents to take leave and have never been intended to fully replace lost earnings. I think that's interesting because in the case of mothers, statutory parental payments do include 6 weeks paid at 90% of average weekly earning. So already built into our existing system is the idea of almost full earnings replacement. At the moment, that's reserved for mothers only. The government could have proudly proclaimed that it does this and it provides mothers with this financial support in the early weeks. And they could have argued that this is only right and fair because mothers are the ones who give birth and breastfeed. Instead, their response seems deliberately lukewarm to the whole concept of statutory earnings replacement, emphasising that the state's involvement is about providing a floor rather than a ceiling, and putting the onus on employers to go further. As we've already seen, 3/4 of employers do no such thing for their employees who are fathers. Maybe it's just me, but this doesn't seem to be the statement of a government wedded to the state playing an inalienable role in replacing mothers' lost earnings either. We will continue to argue the case for affordable statutory leave for all parents. Children's outcomes, parents' mental health, and gender equality are much too important to leave to the mercy of employers. Next slide, please. So, the government's response went on to reiterate the tweaks that it has announced to paternity leave in July 2023, and you can see those here. I'm not clear how the first 2 points will work in reality, because we've always been told that paternity leave, like maternity leave, must be taken in one continuous block around the time of the birth. In any event, as you'll see from my cheeky little illustration here, the phrase rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic springs to mind. Next slide, please. So, what do we know about what the other parties are thinking and saying about paternity and parental leave? So Labour have said that they're committed to reviewing the parental leave system. And I've noticed that Justin Madders, who is Shadow Minister for Employment Rights, has spoken about the Labour Party's desire for paternity pay, paternity leave, maternity leave, and shared parental leave to become day one rights. So that's interesting. The Lib Dems made an announcement at their party conference, which I won't bother reading out here, but you can see there, and seems quite ambitious and interesting, and we look forward to talking to them about that. And the SNP does have some history of some quite progressive thinking on this issue. So again, that looks like something that hopefully we can work with. And last slide, please. So what happens next? Well, these are the current calls to action. So we are doing some thinking and some planning. We are putting a bid together for some funding, and we're talking to partners about how to develop a campaign strategy that focuses on lobbying MPs in the main parties along the lines we've proposed. We want 6 weeks for dads to be a priority in the run-up to the general election later this year and beyond. For now, what we've done is to create some templates for people to use to write to their MPs. And there's an online form which you'll get to via that QR code to capture people's stories. One of the things we need to do is to put a friendly face on this campaign. We need fathers, we need mothers, we need everybody with a stake in this to tell their stories about why this matters. What happens when you can't take paternity leave? What difference does it make when you are able to access leave, both from a mother's point of view and a father's point of view? So if you haven't already, do please have a look at the blog post that this QR code links to. And to keep up to date with what we're doing, you can follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletters. And that is it. So
what a
that's
fantastic,
me done.
What a fantastic and thorough presentation. I think one of the things that two things that strike me, that it seems like the real emphasis here is in employment. There seems to be more emphasis on employment than, say, bonding of families and child development. I'm not saying that's your presentation. I'm saying that that's a kind of wider social narrative that I see. And then the other thing, which I've wondered out loud many times, when we have a reliance or an expectation of a reliance on the private sector to fill in gaps, what does that do if one sort of conceives of the impact of that over generations? What happens for those families? Because there's a broad-based consensus, and I think it's more than that, where partners tend to meet where they have similar education backgrounds, similar income levels, similar socioeconomic expectations, right? And then you compound that with the idea that potentially some fathers in those sectors are receiving extended and enhanced paternity, and those children are seeing a model of their father being active and engaged. They see their mother potentially returning back to work and extending their career, and forget even the idea of just going to work. It's that sense of fulfillment that work can give you, and the opportunities and the prospects that it gives. And I just wonder where all this leads. But that's me thinking out loud. I want to come back and just sort of say, Jeremy, fantastic work, fantastic presentation, very, very clear, and just some initial thoughts on that. But also looking into the chat, I want to just pick up on Mary's early question, which happened before we even started, which was something along the lines of, was this response from the government expected, or is there something else that perhaps one could have done, whether it was as a group or perhaps in the presentation of the petition itself? I'm not sure. Mary, is that a fair summation of your question?
I mean, it was just generally whether it was expected. I mean, I wasn't expecting it to be quite as crushing in its response. And is the answer only money, or are there other things behind this response?
Well, that's very interesting. And I mean, before this session started, that was why we ended up with the slightly clunky start, because Chris and I were chatting about this. I can't really enlighten you any about the government's thinking on this beyond the text of their response, because the only response I received as the person who started the petition is exactly what all the signatories received. So there wasn't even a name on it or anything like that. You know, it's just literally a government response. Yeah, they seem very fixed, don't they, in their thinking on this. For me, it was not unexpected at all. I wasn't expecting really at all that the petition would shift their position. I suppose the purpose of the petition for me, in a sense, was to test the water with the world at large on our specific proposal. So I wanted to see whether people would support the specific idea of 6 weeks for dads made up in this particular way of, 2 weeks paternity and a daddy month. These idea, the idea of parental leave as an individual right for fathers, we at the Institute have been talking about this for years. But I saw this as an opportunity for us to sort of go public with that and see whether people would agree with that idea. So really, for me, that was the main purpose of the petition. And I wasn't expecting the government to shift its position as a result of 14,000 odd people signing. So yeah, I suppose part of what we would like to do moving forward is to do some more engagement with politicians of all colours to understand their thinking, or maybe sometimes their lack of it about this stuff. Because, to be honest, my sense of the current government's position is sometimes it feels like they don't even understand their own system. You know, that's how the consultation that led to their announcements about tweaking paternity leave that came out in July. The consultation that had started 5 years before, that ended up leading to that, was extremely badly put together. It didn't make sense. They chopped and changed in their definitions. It was called all the labels they were using, paternity leave, parental leave, were confused all the way through. So in fact, as the Institute, we gave 2 responses to that consultation. One was focused on the inadequacy of the way the consultation was drafted. And then we gave them our proper consultation, if you like, which was our response to what we thought they really wanted / needed to know. I mean, I don't know. I leave it to everybody to judge the quality of what they put out in July. But I mean, I think it was pretty pathetic, to be honest.
Yeah, totally pathetic. If the reasoning fundamentally is budgetary, then presumably it affects how we should be approaching it in terms of saying, but look at the costs of family breakdown. Look at women going out of the air. I mean, we should be meeting them on their own terms in terms of the financial implications, not just the broader social.
Absolutely. And you know, that's a big part of what we hope to do next, is to engage with people who are much more expert than I am at mapping out the costs and benefits of our proposal. And I think there are lots of potential ways of cutting that. Some of them were set out on my slides sort of midway through, where I talked about the benefits, in terms of father-child attachment, children's outcomes, gender equality, and so on and so on. We need to start to fill in the numbers on those. And at the end of the day, politicians of all colours need that. So that's not just something peculiar to this government. We need to have those numbers to convince Labour or anybody of the merits of what we're talking about.
I want to move over to Kieran's question from Dads Matters UK. Kieran asks, how do we build a whole system approach to transition to fatherhood that develops a societal change in education, motivation, parenting support, mental health support, access to benefits, leave, etc.? Do we need to think about a whole system approach in order to improve isolated issues like leave?
The short answer is yes. You knew I would say that, didn't you, Kieran? Yeah, we do. And I mean, the 6 Weeks for Dads campaign is only a part of what we want to get into party manifestos. So, we published a manifesto for supporting paternal caregiving in November, which sets out 10 policy calls, which covers some are in the field of employment, including the 6 weeks for dads. We've also got policy calls in there relating to health policy and education policy. So, you know, yeah, absolutely. I'm all for the whole system approach. At the same time, I think sometimes you need to get super specific, and that's what we're trying to do with this, you know, because if you frame everything as whole systems, people will kind of listen to you and kind of think, well, yeah, that would be great, but then nothing changes, because you have to have pinned things down, and you have to do what Mary's talking about, where you come up with numbers and show you spend this much and you'll get this much as a result. I guess that's how politics works.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I think when we're thinking about service delivery, a lot of the work that we do, we align ourselves with statutory services that reach families but don't reach dads. And it feels like being specific in those spaces really helps them to understand why we're doing it. And then all of the other stuff leaks into that. So paid parental leave would really help with babies' attachment, development, all of those things. First 1,001 days, all is relevant. And when you look at the NHS services, particularly, but also family hubs now, there's a real push on the first 1,001 days, and it includes dads. And that feels like it's gathering momentum. So sometimes thinking about things outside of that, where there is momentum, feels quite overwhelming to try and do something that looks isolated, but absolutely it feeds into everything else that's happening. And I think it's those conversations that we have with service providers and commissioners that then should be able to filter upwards to government, as well as us trying to influence government and what happens down from government too. Everything that we see for dads feels very isolated within statutory services, and we need to show that that fits, so that the government can see that, well, paid parental leave would really help with education, transition to parenthood, mental health support, supporting more perinatal mental health, attachment. All of those things are really influenced by paid parental leave. And I think, yeah, like you said, Mary's idea of having the numbers around the benefits to, like, cost implications for children, far outweigh cost implications that present for the men that we support. So if we can demonstrate that and really show that that's a needed part, we can definitely not just influence leave, but all of those systems that leak into it. But yeah, it is quite overwhelming when you look at it from the outside, isn't it?
Thanks for all those points, Kieran. That's really, really insightful and well made. Owen, I'm going to come to you before I come over to Lal's question about gay parents. So Owen, go ahead.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jeremy, for the presentation. I guess a couple of things struck me. I totally agree with almost everything that's been said by all of the contributors so far. Some of this data exists around the cost, benefits, and implications. People have been doing, the LSC did some around parental fathers' involvement in the early years, additional parental support, earlier intervention support, linked to the Royal Foundation's work, the Princess of Wales project, which is very much kind of like a revisit on the Children's Centre Sure Start approach from Labour when they got into power, and their investment over 2-3 terms, which had specific measures for fathers included within it. They've done a lot of research, and they're kind of highlighting, and they spoke at the launch of her event in January this year. They had Tony Blair and William Hague, 2 former leaders of the main parties, both sitting at the table saying that what we actually need is to look beyond one term of a government, because that's what a lot of governments seem to be doing. A lot of these policies will take a lot longer to embed themselves, will take a lot longer to actually bear fruit and to show the impact, but no party seems to ever want, on either stripe, to kind of commit to doing something that's going to take 10 or 15 years to show benefit, really. It really requires some cross-party. That's so Jeremy's point about speaking to everyone about this and finding kind of a common ground across the center of everybody, where everyone could kind of agree and say, we commit to this, regardless of who gets in the next 2 terms. We're all going to we can tweak on the edges, but we're all going to basically support these principles because we've seen them working in other places. The data shows us from whether it be Scandinavia or Australia or other places, even here for different socioeconomic groups, the benefits to children, to the parents, and to our economy. There is something a little bit sad. I understand the imperative, of course, about making a financial case, but there is something about, you know, if we want some of these wider gains for society around equality, some of that stuff can't be measured economically really easily. These are moral things that we want to push for as well. You know, if we want a fairer societies for all, it may cost us some money. You know, it may not be the cheapest route. We have to admit that as well. You know, and it seems to me, we seem to be looking for the cheap, well, when I say we, the current government seems to be looking for the cheapest route out of it. You know, I've been to a couple of meetings in Whitehall where they've, not politicians themselves, but civil servants that said, we don't want to get involved in making decisions about telling people how to run their lives and live their lives. And there seems to me to be a bit of a lack of moral fiber behind this decision, where they don't want to seem to be committed to pushing Britain forward to a more equal and fairer society. We're living in a time of a lot of sound bites and polarized views, and I think this is part of it. So yeah, we need to appeal to the moderates across all stripes to try and push this forward over the long term rather than the short term. But a lot of this data is out there. The LSE here in London has got some good stuff around early years and the importance of supporting parents, both dads and mums, in the early years, and the benefits to the children of that. So maybe there's a call for evidence that can be done, where everybody who's got a vested interest in this internationally can kind of put in around the impacts of fathers here in the early years and why we should do it, both financially and, you know, happiness measures of happiness, well-being. These are all really important things as well.
Yeah, yeah. All great points, Owen. Thank you. I want to come to Lal Dalamel's question. What about two dad parents, gay parents? Lal, did you want to come off of mute and perhaps extend your question? Don't feel you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in a rather noisy place at the moment, so you may not hear me, but I just wondered if anything similarly had been done on that front.
For gay dads?
Yes.
I mean, I think the statutory system allows for I mean, of course, it depends on the route of fatherhood, you know. So adoption leave, for example, I think follows the same structure as maternity and paternity, but if it was to gay dads adopting, then one would need to kind of take up the mother's role, if you like, and you know, on paper, and would receive the equivalent of maternity leave, and the other one would be left out in the cold like any other father. That's how it works. So I'm not aware that there's any specific provision, you know, for same-sex parents, either male or female. So similarly, a lesbian mother who wasn't the birth mother would claim what we call paternity leave.
Yeah. I noticed you use the word adoption quite a lot. Was that just your default, or because obviously there are other routes to parenthood, you know, if one of them is not gestating? Yeah.
I mean, I'm referring to that just because I suppose the current system, you know, it is designed around
that method of
a birth mother and a biological father, and so there hasn't been very much thinking thinking in the nomenclature, let's say, about that, and about other ways of forming families. And I suppose the way it's currently designed presumes that the birth mother will also be the person who takes responsibility for childcare for the whole.
Yeah,
of
because
the
she could
first
be a
year.
third party. Yeah.
So
Okay.
so gay dads and I mean, to be honest, most of us, I would say, are making use of a system that is very traditionalist in its design, and so that's really what we're proposing here is a part of how that might start to change. It's not the entirety of how it might change, but it's a step in the right direction, I would hope.
Yeah.
And the fantastic modelling done by male gay parents is a very good thing for all of us, because unarguably they're showing how brilliantly men can do the job.
Yeah.
Yes. Well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of interesting evidence out there about gay fathers, and also about the extent to which, I suppose, what's very interesting about gay fathers is that there's partly the issue of sort of removing some of the sort of gendered issues around division of labour in the home and so on. There's also very interesting evidence that has involved gay fathers that it has helped us to better understand changes in fathers' brains when they take on the role of being a major or primary caregiver, and what's very interesting is that when you look at gay fathers who take those sorts of roles, the changes in their brain look remarkably similar to the changes that happen in mothers' brains. And that's, I would say there's a lot to learn from that in terms of fathers' caregiving roles and the impacts of those more widely.
I think you've raised some really great points there, Jeremy, and thank you very much for your question, Lau. A really insightful question that has clearly triggered an early discussion. I'm sure that discussion is happening in a more broad-based manner elsewhere in the sector. So really interesting to key in on that. I am very aware of time, and again, Jeremy, wonderful to have you here and to share all your insights. I just want to acknowledge some of the other comments in the chat. Georgia really resonates with the idea and actually preceded Owen's call for a greater focus on promotion of strong families with a strong child development focus, prevention of maladaptive features that might come up. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that both Owen and George, I'm sure everybody here are in agreement around that. And I want to pick up on Lydia's point as well about adoption, where she states, I'm an adoptive mother. My husband took the full adoption leave, which was equivalent to maternity leave, and required 26 weeks of employment at time of matching of his employer. So identifying a barrier for all. And only allowing some to access that. I was a student at the time, and so I had no leave to take. His work could barely cope with this. We didn't attempt to do any shared leave as part of this. The whole system expected me to be the person taking the leave as a female parent. Thank you for sharing that, Lydia. Very insightful from the perspective of an adoptive parent. I think at this point, Rachel also says, thank you very much for the session and the great work, Jeremy, Fatherhood Institute and Future Men. Okay, having to go. So I think at this point, it makes sense to wrap up the session. If anybody has any sort of final statements or thoughts that they want to share before we close out, please go ahead. I'll open that floor. I think I've seen a lot of thanks to you, Jeremy, and the Fatherhood Institute for all the work that you're doing. So at that point, I shall say that we will call this Agenda Dad to a close. Thank you very much all for attending. All assets will be shared over the website and through social media. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks Chris
everybody.
and Charlotte for organising. Thanks, Jeremy, for presenting.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good to see you. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, folks.
Thanks for attending all.
Bye.
Take care, Kieran. Take care,
Bye.
Georgia. Take care, guys. Thanks, Adrian.
Bye.